Correctional Services has directed the Parole Board to review its decision on former Claremont police officer Marius van der Westhuizen serving a 24-year jail sentence for killing his children. Van der Westhuizen is due for release on parole next Wednesday, but the decision has been put on hold. To discuss this, I'm now joined by a former Major General with the Western Cape SARPs, and that's Jeremy Vearey. A very good afternoon to you, Jeremy. Thanks very much for your time. Is this common for the department to ask a board to review its decision?
Well, if you have the access and the means to do that, you can, but the majority of our people in our country don't. And even if you do have the means, the costs to yourself as having to do it, legal costs. And I want to use this case study as an example. You know, firstly, you can't review if you've never been in the hearing in the first place. Now, you know that people's costs, victims who want to come there, are not covered by the state or correctional services. It's not like in a court where you say you're going to take a day off, and then through the NPA and the court, they instruct that you get compensated for that day on your transport and all those matters, and then give you a letter, for example, to go to your employer. This type of victim consideration does not exist in the correctional services. Secondly, you know, people have to come there, and there's victim impact assessments that they might want to bring forward. Now, a victim impact assessment is an objective study by a psychologist of you as a victim in relation to, that is important to the parole board. But as is the case in the case that of one of my ex-colleagues, after I'm retired now, you know, she had to pay 40,000 rand for that victim report impact assessment, and then to go to a parole board and then they don't even put it on the table, shows you how inconsiderate the process is and how lip service they pay on terms of being so-called victim-centered. So those are some of the things we need to look at. Now, Charlotte van der Westhuizen, she has a fortunate position that I was there to support from the beginning. Often, you don't have that kind of support that comes, you know, for the victim there. They sit alone in that parole hearing, alone. And then they must listen to a chairperson who, and this must stop in correctional services, who refers to the parolee who sits opposite to that victim as a client. Now, I don't know, this client language, I've been in many parole hearings, it has seeped into correctional services language over the past few years. Listen, if you use that kind of managerial nonsense to describe your relationship with prisoners, we need to relook at what that implies, and especially what that means when you have a victim sitting in front of you, and you are clearly using a word to refer to the parolee that shows that you value that parolee, that relationship more than that of the victim. The second thing is, you know, expert reports. I mean, what's the use of correctional services paying experts, medical psychologists, otherwise, and then you don't listen to their recommendations? And you let subjective people who are often priests or whatever on the board to make a determination beyond that objective process. Now, we've gone through a high-profile case where this was problematic with our previous president before. And we really need to look at how we weigh evidence that is brought to parole hearings and what is the status of that. Because no ordinary chairperson who doesn't have any insight into psychological work or whatever of an expert nature can overthrow an expert's report. So that, to me, is the other particular thing. The third thing that we need to look at in terms of this situation, do you know, if I was, like Charlotte, the victim in that situation, there are also assessments, psychological assessments and criminologist assessments that gets done by the Correctional Services on the parole. But you know that you as a victim have no right of access to that. Now, what kind of a process is this? You know, if I am a victim and that perpetrator has spoken about me in some report, I have the right of access to that information in order to contest that and also to respond to that, even if I don't contest it. But I have the right of reply to whatever evidence or process informs a decision by the parole board to grant parole. And that, to me, is something that needs to be looked at. Evidential practices there, how evidence is weighed, how things. I know it is not a court. I know it is not a court, and I accept that. But the point is that, and to tell Charlotte, for example, like that in that parole hearing where I was sitting, I mean, you must forgive, otherwise you will never heal. The Correctional Services, by what authority do you as a parole board officer tell a victim that? Who are you, God? Are you playing some priest role? Because you do not certainly have that designation inside that parole board. And you ought to be a little bit more sensitive. And you do this in front of your client, which is the parolee. What are you reflecting in terms of bias here? And in terms of sensitivity to a woman who has suffered the death of her 3 children being shot in front of her? This is the approach you tell her. Who made you God to tell her to forgive? And those are some of the things that we need to look at, you know. And the insensitivity of the process. I mean, you have a parole officer putting his finger down on this woman's photos of her children in front of her. She broke down and cried. If I wasn't next to her, she would collapse and I had to tie her down for that. But the point I am making here, there's a lot in the process that desires correction, from the way we deal with people to making it affordable for people to actually come to those parole hearings. Because I can assure you, everybody doesn't have the means that Charlotte van der Westhuizen has. And that, to me, is the issue. Issues that need to be addressed. I am heartened by the fact that the minister is going to review a decision. But I think we need to go deeper. The minister needs to review the process, need to relook at things like how are victims from Mdansani going to get to a prison in Cape Town? Because this is often what happens. There's a circulation of prisoners all over the country to deal with high numbers. Some prisoners that are from the Cape land up in Mangaung, some from KZN land up in Worcester prison, especially those who are long-term prisoners who come to the final end of their sentences. They are often in prisons that are hundreds and thousands of kilometers away from where they lived originally. Now, how is the victim going to get there?